Welcome back. We have one more video to end the section, and fortunately it's a pretty lightweight one. We've been doing a lot of pretty challenging, heavy stuff around binding and this and passing down functions and downward data flow, and it gets a little crazy. We're going to take a break and address something that we've been ignoring for a while: keys. So anytime we've been mapping over some data and returning a list of components, which we've done a lot in this course so far, we've been getting a message saying, if we pop over here, let me show it to you. Warning, each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. So we have two of those warnings because we have two components. Both of them have a list we're iterating over, making a bunch of smaller child components, and none of them have a key prop. So what is this key prop that we're supposed to add? Well, it's just an attribute we include like any other attribute. So it's called key, and we set it equal to some unique identifier. And the reason we need to do this, if you go to the documentation, it explains that keys help React identify which items have changed, are added, or are removed, which is really important when we have a list of very similar pieces of information, a bunch of components. React sees we have a list of 10 button components or number item components. It needs to keep track of them individually, so it knows when to remove one or update one, and so on. So when choosing a value for your key, the most important thing is that it needs to be unique. So here's an example with our number list. We just set key to be n, which is the number itself, the value. So if we come over to the code, and I'm going to work in the better number list, here is our list of nums. We could just come down here and set key to be n, which is just the number itself. And if we reload the page, or it does it automatically, we now only have one warning because I didn't edit this first one. If we look in the dev tools, and we look at the second list and look at any of the number items, you can see that they now have a key that's showing up inside of the React Dev Tools. And right now it just matches the value. So this one has a key of 1, this one has a key of 4. And this works, at least in this case, because our data is unique. Each one of these is a unique number. So everything's fine, there's no problems. However, where it gets problematic is when your data is not unique. So let's say now I have a couple of 2s and a couple of 5s, like this. If we first remove the key entirely, let's just see what happens. How does our app behave right now with duplicate data? Well, if you click 2, all of the 2s are removed. If we click 5, all of them are removed. Now that may or may not be the behavior we want, but that is how it's working right now because of our remove implementation. We're filtering everything out based off of that number. So we remove all 5s, we remove all 2s. However, if I add the key in, it starts acting really weird. So if I set key to be that number, the first thing you'll see is that we actually get a warning. It says, or a new warning, encountered 2 children with the same key of 2. And then another one for the key of 5. Because we duplicated 5, we duplicated 2, they all have the same key. If we look in React, Dev Tools, come down again, open this up, you'll see the keys are identical for all of the ones that have 2. So now when I click, let's see what happens. If I click on 2, well, that's weird. These 2 are still here, but before we added that key, all of them are removed. But what's extra weird, if I click 1, we now end up with a new 5 being added to the end. If I click 4, we also end up with another new 5. So this behavior is really, really weird. It's not what we want. So the solution is to make sure you're using a unique key. So you should never have keys that are not unique. You should never have duplicate keys. That's really problematic. They need to be unique so that React can keep track of what's been changed, what needs to be added, what needs to be removed. That is the identifier. It's the hook. The way that React knows a component is based off of that key. And we need to use them anytime we have these repeated elements. So some general rules for picking a key. The best option is to use something that is absolutely unique, and usually that will be coming from your own data set. If you're working with a database or an API, most often your data already has a unique ID associated with a user or a to-do or whatever the piece of data is coming from a database, because React is not the only thing that needs unique IDs. It's pretty standard across all sorts of applications. So here's an example of what that would look like. If we're mapping over a bunch of to-dos, if each to-do has an ID, we would set the key to be to-do.id. However, with what we're doing right now, we don't have IDs. We could alter our application and add in IDs, but we have another option as a last resort for now. If we don't have these stable IDs as part of our data set, we could use the index of the item in the array. It's not a very good idea, but it is an option. So we would do something like this, where instead of map, we're adding an index that we can use it and set key to be the index. So I can show you that here. Map, we're going to add IDX or I, and then set key to be that index. So now if I refresh, we no longer have that message that says duplicated keys. And if we look at what we're getting, we're going to have a bunch of indices that start at 0. So key of the first item is 0, and then key of 1, key of 2. So we now have these unique keys. So this works if and only if your data is not going to change. So if things need to be reordered, if you're going to be removing items, then you should not use the index. That's just a good rule of thumb. It can cause issues with performance and bugs around state. On the React documentation, they actually talk about a specific blog post by this person, Robin Pokorny, and it's all about why you shouldn't use an index for keys unless your data does not change, unless your data does not need to be reordered or components removed from that list. Okay, so what other options do we have? Well, there's one other thing that I'll show you later in the course. We'll be using these. There are little libraries, tools that will help you make short, unique identifiers. So one is called short ID. Another one is called UUID. I think it's universally unique identifier. You basically install it, and then whenever you need a unique ID, you call it, and it gives you something that is guaranteed to be unique, and you can use that. So I'll show you an example later on when we're doing some more substantial applications. But this is an easy option if you don't have any built-in IDs. So for now, I'm going to change this back to use the data itself as the key, but we'll enforce that our data has to be unique. So we're not going to have any duplicated numbers, and this will work for now. So the point of all this is just to introduce the idea of a key. Whenever we're creating a list of components, we're mapping over something and returning components, you have to have a key. React needs it to know what's changed, when to remove something, when to add something, when to update something. And it needs to be unique. You can rely on an index. However, you shouldn't do that if your data is going to be reordered or removed. So it's best not to. And then there's third-party libraries that you can include, which we'll see how to do later. Next up, we have a pretty fun exercise.